Hello, guys. Sorry about that. You have to bear with me a bit. The first time I'm doing this. So, namaskaram, namaskara, vandanam, swagatam, suswagatam to all. Um, my name is Arun Krishnan. I am an author, among other things. This is not my day job. And this podcast, the Itihasa podcast, is where I'm going to be reading out my first published novel, The Battle of Vathapi, Nandi's Charge. So, before I start, the idea here is that I would be covering a chapter every week in this podcast. And before I start, I would like to read out the author's note. If I'm audible, so can someone in the audience kindly add, say that I'm audible? I'm just going to check once before I proceed. Okay, I'm assuming that I'm audible, so let's get started then. So, this is an author's note that I've written, and I'll just read through it because it'll give some context into what I'm saying. Writing a period novel is fraught with two main difficulties. The first deals with the narrative itself, while the second with the language. Historical fiction is all about spinning a story, keeping specific documented events in mind. In this story, there are certain characters who are real, who are part of history. Mahendravarman and Narasimhavarman, the Pallava kings, Pulikeshi, the Chalukyan king, Harshavardhana, Tribhuvana, and Manavamma, the Sri Lankan kings. Of course, Harshavardhana was from the north, the northern kingdom, the Pandyan king Jayantavarman, and the Ganga king Sri Vikrama. Since this story is set in the 7th century CE, details about these personalities are patchy in general. There is, of course, more information about the kings belonging to the larger kingdoms, Pallava, Chalukya, and Vardhana. However, knowledge about the smaller kings is mostly in the context of their relationships with their more famous contemporaries. Information about the Sri Lankan kings has been culled from the Buddhist text from Sri Lanka, Mahavamsa, as well as from Sri K.A. Nilakanta Shastri's magnum opus, A History of South India, from prehistoric times to the fall of Vijayanagara. There remains some confusion about the names of the Lankan kings, and I've gone ahead with Shastriji's interpretation. The period under discussion was one of major societal, political, and cultural changes in India. This was a time when Buddhism and Jainism had many adherents. Nalanda and Takshashila were flourishing universities attracting scholars from all over the world, including the Chinese scholar Xuanzang or Huan as we know him in India. The Hindu Bhakti movement was just taking off in South India. Appar, the famous Shaivite saint, was spearheading this movement in Kanchi, the capital city of the Pallavas. Paranjyoti, who later became one of the 63 Nayanmars, that is, a Shaivite saint, under the name Siruttondar, is another figure we know of more as a Shiva Bhakta rather than as a warrior. All other characters in this story are fictional and are a product of my own imagination. It is quite possible that characters similar to them might have played a role in actuality, but there's no way for us to know that. Here, an author has a lot more leeway in terms of character development, and that's what I've tried to do. There is one character, however, who is close to my heart, the Chalukyan spy chief Naganandi. I've chosen the same name for the Chalukyan spy chief as given by the great Tamil author Kalki in his historical novel Sivagami in Savadam. My interest in this genre in an Indian setting dates from my reading of Kalki's Ponniyin Selvan, and hence this character is my gentle hat tip to the great man. I cannot claim to have visited all the places that I've written about, but I have been to most of them. Here is where the modern author, with his access to the internet, has advantages over his predecessors. I have visited Aihole, Vatapi, or Badami as it's now known, Kanchi, Mamallapuram, that's Mahabalipuram, Pollanarua, which is in Sri Lanka and after which I have patterned Anuradhapura, and Simhagiri. My descriptions of the Bagh caves are based purely on online research. The second involves the right use of language. We cannot use all manner of phrases or expressions while writing a historical novel. For example, an author cannot use the expression as regular as clockwork when the story is set in a time period without clocks. An even more intricate problem is in how to talk about time and distance. Ancient units of time in India were very different. We used words like nimisha and muhurta for time and yojana for distance. These do not correspond directly with modern units. If I'd used these, I would have to provide footnotes everywhere, translating them to modern units, and it would have detracted from the reading of the book. Hence, I've stuck to using seconds, minutes, and hours for time, and feet, yards, and miles for distance. The word for history in Sanskrit is Itihasa. Thus, it happened. While I cannot say that about the story that I've put down on paper, my fond hope is that it gives readers a feel for what might have happened. If you notice, this podcast is called the Itihasa podcast with a question mark after Itihasa because I write historical fiction, not history, and so the question mark is very much required. So let's get started. Today, I'm going to start with the prologue. I want to take you back in time it to about almost 1400 years ago to the year 630 CE. Kanchi, November 630 CE. The setting sun cast its baleful glance over the beautiful city of Kanchi. Or so it seemed to the well built young man standing on the terrace of one of the principal palaces in the city. A more sympathetic observer might have waxed lyrical on the sunlight glinting off the gold plated gopurams or temple towers, the shimmering lakes, and the soaring towers and palaces. But baleful was the word that leapt to the mind of the usually cheerful young man as he stood looking out over the city. Since the events at Pulalur all those years ago, the city seemed to have slowly sunk into a state of apathy, the setting sun seemingly a fitting counterpoint to the general mood in the city. Of course, he reflected, his mood was shaped in no small measure by news of his father's illness, an illness of the mind rather than of the body, as the palace physician had explained to him. The Vaidyas, or physicians, could work miracles with diseases of the body. However, when the mind itself lost the will to live, there was not much that the esteemed members of the medical profession could do. And his father's mind had given up the will to live, it seemed. The events at Pulalur had not just robbed the country of significant chunks of land, but also his father's will to go on living. It was as if the loss of the physical had resulted in a mental lassitude that was far worse than any wounds suffered in 100 battles. A sigh escaped this young prince as he gazed at the city shrouding itself in the darker veil of the gathering dusk. Torches started to be lit in the houses, palaces, and temples of his ancient hometown in a vain attempt to dispel the gathering gloom. Melancholy can be very dangerous for anyone, especially one in his position, he thought, as he gave himself a small shake to lift himself out of his dark mood. Just then, a measured tread on the steps leading to the terrace, one that he had heard countless times a day since his childhood, announced the arrival of Chittan, his factotum. You're as difficult to find now that you have grown up, as you were when you were a young lad playing hide and seek, my lord, said the old man, gasping for breath from the exertion of climbing up 4 flights of steps. But you can always find me, can't you? Asked the young man, a smile playing lightly on his lips. That's because you've always liked heights, and I've always known that you would find the highest places to hide. The prince chuckled as he let the old man catch his breath. Not as young as I used to be, remarked Chitan as he leaned over the balustrade, gulping in great quantities of air into his lungs. It's okay, Ayya. Take your time. Ayya is a respectful term for an elder or someone in a superior social position. In this particular context, it's used for an elder. It's okay, Ayya. Take your time, replied the young man, using the honorific that he used to address one who had raised him from childhood. No time to waste, Thambi. Thambi is younger brother in Tamil. No time to waste, Thambi. The king is nearing his end, completed the prince, a strange look in his eyes. Death comes to us all, Thambi, even to the ones who are seemingly immortal, like our parents, said Chitan philosophically. The king wishes to speak to you before. Let's go, said the prince, nodding his head and leading the way as he bounded down the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time, his older companion following at a more sedate pace. The king's palace was diagonally opposite his own, and the prince rushed into it, up the stairs to the second floor, and down to the large room at the end of the corridor that was guarded by 5 soldiers of his father's elite guard. The captain in charge of security, recognizing the prince, nodded imperceptibly at his unit as they stood aside to allow the prince to enter the room. The room itself was huge, with a large square 4-poster bed placed along one wall and to the center. Fine nets hung down from the 4 posts to keep out the mosquitoes. Torches were set on the wall opposite the bed, giving the room an eerie glow. The room led out to a balcony on the far side, from the door leading into the room. A chair and desk were placed along the right wall. Palm leaf manuscripts were strewn on the table. Styluses of varying sizes were kept on the right side of the desk, a work area for a king known as much for his prowess with the written word as with the sword. As the prince entered the room, he noticed the chief physician standing by the head of the bed. A couple of serving ladies stood on either side of the bed, fanning the king. The prime minister stood at the foot of the bed and bowed to the prince as he walked up to his father. The old man's stertorous breathing was the only sound to be heard in the room apart from the hissing of the torches. The king's emaciated body seemed puny against the expanse of the bed. The once luxuriant mass of hair on his head was thin and wispy, and his once coal-black beard was now completely silver. Pulalur had done that to him, thought the prince. As the prince leaned close to the king, his eyelids fluttered open and he whispered, "Is it you, boy?" "Yes, Appa," said the prince, misty-eyed. It had been a while since his father had called him boy. "Ah, I feared that I wouldn't be able to see you before I passed away to Shiva's realm." "Why do you speak like that, Appa? You have long years still to live, and Narsi, I may be sick and weak, but I still have a functioning brain," said the king, his lips twitching into a grin. "The physicians say that you're recovering well, Appa, and they lie to me as they lie to you." The young prince's shoulders bowed as he caught hold of his father's hands. "Why do you torture yourself so, Appa?" "It's all because of Pullalur, my boy." "History will judge you well, Appa," said Darcy. "A man on his deathbed doesn't really care for history, Narsi. People are saying that my converting to the Jain faith was responsible for Pullalur. What do they know, Appa?" "Perhaps they are right, Mamalla. Perhaps they are right. At least I die knowing that I have reverted to a stronger faith through the grace of Appar. Perhaps the pacifism of my former faith did rob my hand of its prowess on the battlefield." "You know that's not true, Appa." "Maybe. Then again, maybe not," said the king. "Impending death brings a fresh perspective that more healthy men are incapable of seeing. If only it hadn't come too late for me," said the king, lapsing into silence and closing his eyes. His breathing became hoarser, and as the Vaidya moved closer to him, the king raised his left hand to wave him away. He then gestured for Mamullah to come closer to him. They say that when the time comes for us to die, we ought not to have any regrets. Unfortunately, I have a couple of regrets, gasped the king, his breath ragged. You need to rest, Appa. No, sighed the king. I will have all the time to rest soon. He then fell into a fit of coughing. He resumed after a brief pause. My only regrets are that I could not complete my dream project of building wonderfully sculpted temples along the shoreline. And Pullalur, completed the prince, and Pullalur, acquiesced the king. He subsided into another fit of coughing, and as his breathing became even more labored, he clung to Mamullah's arm. Promise me, Mamullah, whispered the king. Yes, Appa, said Mamullah, bending low to place his ear against the king's mouth. Promise me that you will fulfill these two desires of mine. I promise, Appa, said Mamullah. The king's breathing suddenly became ragged, and he gave a long gargle as a breath escaped his body for the last time. His hand went limp in the prince's hand. The prince kissed his king's hand and folded it across his chest. Long live Maharaja Narasimhavarman Pallavan, intoned the prime minister, bowing towards Mamalla. That ends the prologue. So it starts with the death of Narasimhavarma Pallava's father, Mahendravarman, and the story kicks off from here. I hope you folks liked it, and if there are any questions, I'm ready to take them. Anyone? Um, so if you guys have any questions about either the book or the story or the history, um, please do post a comment, and I will try and answer it. I'm going to give myself a minute here. So if there are questions after that, I will end the broadcast. And for those folks who joined in to listen, thank you so much. Spread the word. I am, I will be posting more such podcasts every week. Chapter one is next week, and that's where the story really, really kicks off. All right. Thank you so much. Namaste, namaskaram, Jai Hind, and I'll see you next week. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Pratap. Thank you so much for those kind words. Thank you, guys.